In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
Welcome back to another edition of the Daily Memphian's Memphis Grizzlies podcast. This is your host, Drew Hill, joined as always by columnist Chris Herrington. It is the Nashville edition of the Daily Memphian Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Chris and I are both here in Nashville for Grizzlies training camp. We've been through the first 2 days. Not a ton to come out of it. A little bit of news, which we'll get into. But so far, so good. Chris, your thoughts on Nashville training camp?
You know, if they're going to, and they're not making us come to Nashville, we could have stayed in Memphis. So, it's sort of on us, I guess. But if you're going to, have media come from a different city to your training camp, it'd be nice to see something other than guys shooting 3-pointers after practice and then an organized scrum in a corner. Help us out a little bit. Let us see them going through the new offense and see some other stuff. That would be my wish, but that is not the way it works anymore in the NBA. It is much more regimented than it was a decade ago. But it's nice to be here. It's nice to be in the gym, to get a look at some of these guys, even if we don't really see them doing anything. We're off to the races a little bit with this NBA season.
Yeah, I agree. And in football, in the NFL, they watch parts of camp. They get to see the plays and it's all vanilla stuff. But that would be nice. You're right. That would be nice if we could get a little bit more than just dudes shooting threes by themselves and free throws after practice. But, it's a change of pace. It's different. I welcome that. So, I've got a sister that lives here, so it's good to see family or whatever. So that's great. But yeah, this would have been much more convenient to happen in Memphis.
You got to see family and I got to see a plate of biscuits from Loveless Cafe. So it's worked out for both of us.
Which I drove past on the way, by the way. I drove past Loveless Cafe this morning on the way to Starbucks to get a coffee. I might have to stop in there before I go back to Memphis.
It is a tourist trap. It is a tourist trap. It has really good food and excellent biscuits and peach and strawberry preserves.
Hey, it's hard to beat that. Do you like country music, by the way?
Yes, it depends. I don't like everything that you would classify as country music, but yeah, I like country music 100%. But, you're not going to, SEC tailgate country, macho dudes, Luke Bryan-y kind of stuff. No. Merle Haggard, yes. Miranda Lambert, yes. All kinds of stuff you classify as country I like.
Interesting. I didn't know. I wasn't sure what the answer was going to be to that. But I came in wanting to know that since we are in Nashville, whether or not you were a country music fan. You're a classic country music fan, sounds like. More so than modern.
Yeah, but I like a lot of it. I like Miranda Lambert. I like, Casey Musgraves if and when, she was classified as country. There's lots of mainstream country I like too. Eric Church I like. It depends. I take it one artist, one song at a time,
We had Shabuzi, the bar song, playing at the end of practice, which was about as country as you're going to get, I think, outside of maybe when John Conchar has the aux cord.
I really, and no one's asked anybody this, but I guess we got one more chance at it, but I'm probably not going to do it. I sort of goofed about this in my training camp preseason preview thing. What are the team building activities in Nashville? Or are they going to have they gotten Zach Edey on a party tractor on downtown Nashville? Are they hitting the clubs on Lower Broadway? Can Luke Kennard and John Conchar get, John Dez out to do some line dancing? As far as I know, none of this has happened.
I want to see Zach Edey do some line dancing. That would be
100%.
That would be, to me, the best thing that could happen.
We need some boot scooting boogie from Zach Edey is what we need.
I did see on Luke Kennard's Instagram story, they did go out to some bar place. I mean, everywhere here has music, so I'm assuming they heard some sort of music. But yeah, it is Nashville edition of the camp. It did not start out too well, I think you could say. And we got a lot to talk about. Obviously, we're going to talk some Edey. We're going to talk about what the main things to come from media day in the first 2 days of camp. And we're gonna do rapid fire, I think. I put some questions out there. We're limited for time today, but yeah, we'll answer some questions from Twitter and keep this thing going. But the big piece of news from Tuesday at camp was that Jaren Jackson strained his hamstring on a drive to the basket. It has since been announced that that is a low grade strain, which is obviously very good news for the Grizzlies. Just a quick little temperature check before that about the level of concern. I would say it wasn't that high. But I do think that, this is something that he's going to recover from pretty quickly, which is good news. It might mean he misses some time in the preseason. He was in sweats yesterday. So my guess is he's going to do very limited stuff for a little bit. As to when he'll be actually back, the team hasn't put any sort of announcement out yet. But look at the Grizzlies.
Let's pull back and clarify that a little bit, because I did see some stuff out there yesterday of people saying that the Grizzlies announced that Jaren was going to be good for opening night. They did not do that.
No, they didn't say that.
Taylor Jenkins did not say that. The way I would sort of interpret the situation would be if thinking like the injury reports they put out, like, the day before a game or day of a game. If they were putting out an injury report today for opening night, Gigi Jackson would be listed as out. Vince Williams Jr. would be listed as doubtful, which means out. And
I think Vince would be out. And the reason I say I think Vince would be out because typically when they go to doubtful, it means they're going to questionable next, and Vince isn't going to play. In any of the preseason. So I would say
maybe he would be out. I was trying to convey there's a slight difference between him and Gigi.
Yeah.
But Jaren would be questionable, and questionable means you're probably going to play, but we're going to take a look at it before we put you out there. And I think that's sort of where Jaren is. Like, there's a good chance he's available for opening night, but it's not a certainty. But it certainly seems like something, if it does linger that far, it probably won't linger much farther, is the sense.
Yeah. So obviously that is good news. And I know there was a lot of panic. And look at the Grizzlies, they've heard the people. I'm not saying they were ever not transparent about the injuries, but here they are making the announcement before they put any sort of release out. Hey, by the way, Jaren had something. So I think that's
dang. I was doing back in the good old days a bit earlier about how, we got more access and seen more stuff, 10, 15 years ago. Also, 10, 15 years ago, we probably wouldn't even have found out about the Jaren mild hamstring tweak in practice, right? I think they've gotten sensitive to the criticism, whether the criticism was warranted or not. They've gotten sensitive to it, and they're going out of their way to be very specific about what's happening with some of these guys.
Yeah. So that's the bit of news that I think people need to know about. We did have media day on Monday. I'm curious what the most interesting pieces from media day in these first 2 days of camp have been for you. What has stood out?
I mean, media day seems like a year ago at this point, even though it was this week. So I can sort of barely remember media day itself. I didn't think there were any big headlines out of media day. We both sort of wrote about it. I think probably in writing, you could tell we struggled. It wasn't like the Steven Adams thing was a big headline on media day a year ago. The John Morant news coming down about him being able to practice with the team, which we didn't know the day before. There was nothing at that level of newsworthiness on media day. I think the thing that I think, I'm going to guess you agree with this. I think most people do. The thing that has been, other than the Jaren little injury blip, the thing that's been most striking about getting into training camp is the degree to which they are suggesting that the offensive changes are significant. And we have not seen it. We won't see it until they get into a basketball game. But there's a lot of suggestion from lots of people that this is really going to be a pretty profound change.
Yeah. So I do have a couple things for media day, but I think now that you brought up the offense, let's talk about that. Because there was a lot of questions going into this when they hired, LaRoche and they hired Asalo, and you kind of wondered how much they were going to change and what degree it would be. And it does feel like they're adopting a lot of that, and those two guys have some crossover in terms of the way they think about scoring, particularly in the half court, the way that they think about operating an offense in terms of, I think the thing that keeps getting brought up is this is not really going to be 2-man basketball. This is going to be 5-man basketball. And those are just words, right? But like,
Right.
there's going to be a lot of off the ball movement. There's going to be a lot of cutting. It's going to be, when a point guard makes a read, he's not just reading what's happening with the big. Everyone else has to read what's happening in the play and move accordingly, depending on what the defense is doing. And this whole idea that, and again, we've talked about this before, but like Asalo's idea is to put players in 2 buckets, in the advantage creator bucket and the people that are able to take advantage of those advantages. And so I think that, those guys are going to be Desmond Bain, John Morant. The advantage creator buckets are going to be shooters that have to have attention and Zach Edey screens and those sorts of things. And it's going to be on everybody to make sure that the defender is wrong no matter what decision he makes. And that requires a lot of movement. And, I keep going back to an interview. If you're trying to figure out what this looks like, I keep going back to this interview that Asalo did with a news company in France. And it was in English. You can find it. I believe it was SK Week was the name of the YouTube channel, or Squeak, maybe. That's probably how they do it. Squeak. And he compared it to Mike D'Antoni's Rockets. That was like the thing, that the ideals that he was kind of following here of like, there's going to be a lot of, it doesn't necessarily have to have a ton of ball movement, but there's going to be a lot of movement in general on offense. And that's definitely going to be an adjustment for everybody. And I think I think Taylor kind of alluded to this. It looks complex to the eye, but the idea of it is that it can be very simple. And you don't have to run a ton of plays, and you can kind of, make decisions on the fly. And then the other part of this is that they're going to play really fast. And like that's something that they've made clear, I think, that they're going to play in transition as much as possible.
I am still very much in a wait and see mind frame about all of this, frankly, because I've been down the road before. Coach implementing something that's dramatically different, and I've seen tissue rejection happen with that. And you go back to what works. I've seen that happen with the Memphis Grizzlies in the past. I also think there's a difference between what something looks like on the blackboard versus what it looks like when you're running through it in your own practice gym versus what it looks like when another NBA team is on the floor trying to stop you. And so it might all be, it might all be sound. It might all be the best way to go. It might all work great. It also might not be as traumatic as people make it sound. And it also just might backfire, and they may have to rewind it. All these things are possible. And I think we'll find out when they start playing basketball. My main concern, if I have a concern about it, it is the growing pains concern. It is that obviously they're doing this because they believe it will ultimately lead to more efficient offense, right? I don't know, even if that is true and they get there, I don't know if they get there in game 1 of 82. And so I worry a little bit about the slow start aspect of it, with you guys thinking too much about what they're supposed to be doing and how they're supposed to be running this offense, instead of just like playing basketball more instinctually. And I think the goal is for it to be an more instinctual flowing kind of basketball, but it is an adjustment, it sounds like. So I have some degree of concern about sort of slow start, growing pain stuff.
I would agree with that. And like they've said, it's not perfect. It's kind of ugly right now. And it's the install, right? It's just the beginning of it. You can't afford for it to be ugly a month and a half into the season. Like it's too late at that point. It feels like we went through that experience last year with the miserable start for the team. And so the hope is obviously that can be avoided. I want to go back to Media Day, though, to the original question here real quick, because I think we both wrote columns from Media Day. Yours went up on Monday. Mine went up Tuesday morning. And we had some crossover in what we took away from it. And for you, it was, I liked the line about being losers is so last year. Like I found that, I like the way you wrapped that column up for sure. And to me, it's like one of the big things that's following this team right now is just what a mystery they are, right? Like we can comment on all of the stuff about, where they're put in the preseason rankings and projections and whatever. Those don't really matter all that much, to be honest. The truth is, I think everybody's just dying to know, is this team still in the class of the West? Are they still contenders? What are they going to look like? What is this going to look like when they get on the floor? And I thought it was pretty significant that Ja acknowledged that, Zach Kleiman acknowledged that. Like a lot of the voices, especially the major voices, acknowledged that it is a bit of a mystery because we haven't seen this coherent whole. We haven't seen this team, everybody together. The guys that developed last year that kind of came into the fray, and then the big stars, they haven't been on the court together all that much. Marcus Smart's experiment was very short. I think all of those things kind of do put a smell of mystery in the air here as we approach the season. And I'm very curious to see what this is going to look like. And that was probably my big takeaway. But what do you think of that? Did you find that notable?
Yeah, I mean, last season being a gap year is not guaranteed. I mean, I think the tools are in place for a very strong bounce back for the Grizzlies, certainly, but it's not guaranteed. Sometimes you have something that just slips away and you don't get it back, and that would be the sort of the nightmare scenario for the franchise. Is we were the hot young team. We were looking at this long period of contention, and things went haywire, and for whatever reason, you can't sort of get it back together. I think it's a possibility. I do not think that's at all likely. I think the tools are in place for the team to be very good this season. It's interesting to me, like sort of hearing, reading and listening to, outside perspectives on it, because like I was listening to one pod yesterday where someone who I'm friendly with, who I respect a lot, was asking the question, could the Grizzlies finish first in the West? And the day before, this is another pod with someone else in a similar, who I similarly and respect, was taking the under on the over-under, right? And so, like, you put those two things together, you're talking about a 10-game range, basically, an outcome, and that's not even assuming some injury cataclysm. That's just normal basketball. Like, are they a 46-win team or a 56-win team? In a normal season, it could go either of those directions. And so I think it's really interesting. I think they're in an interesting place. The cliche is that, like, the local people overrate the team relative to the national, but, like, I won't be picking the Grizzlies to win the West. That's for sure in the regular season. Who knows in the playoffs, but I'm not going to pick them to finish first. And so I think it's a really intriguing season because there's a lot at stake and there's a lot of uncertainty.
Definitely. I want to get into a couple of things we wrote about, and then we'll do some rapid fire questions. But first, let's take a break for a message from our sponsor.
Want to make a big impact without getting lost in a big system? Join Youth Villages to be a force for families while becoming part of one. Help make positive changes on a national scale, one community at a time. It takes a family to transform lives. Start with yours. Apply now at youthvillages.org/careers.
Okay, Chris. So after day one of camp, you wrote a little bit about Santi Aldama and the front court rotation.
That's generous of you to characterize this a little bit.
You wrote a lot. You never write a little bit. You never write a little bit.
Yeah, fair. For the people in. It's not intentional. I can't help myself.
The train is on the tracks and you just can't, it just gets rolling, That's the way it goes sometimes.
We got to get to the end of the journey, however long it takes.
I got to reading it this morning and I'm glad that you wrote about it because I do think Santi is a fascinating piece this year. Not only because he's up for an extension, but because he is still 23 years old. He did have a good summer with Spain. I don't want to overrate what he did with Spain because I do think it's a different style of basketball, but it's encouraging to see him play well. As you wrote, what were your takeaways?
Let me ask you, there's a question I pose that I don't really delve into because, again, I'm waiting to see it. But let me turn the question back around to you. We were talking about like the deep offensive system they're trying to run. Doesn't it sound like it's set up pretty well for Santi Aldama the way they want to play?
I think it does. Because I mean, look,
He is probably of the front court players, he is probably the most skilled ball handler and passer. He's not the best player, but as a ball handler and passer, he's probably the most skilled of the front court guys to have.
yeah, I mean, the offense seems conducive to more people having more opportunity to play with the ball. And I think that's a positive for Santi. But I think you touch on it too. It's like, yeah, Santi is useful because I think he can play with everyone. Although you pose the question, can he play with Edey? And I think that is a real question. And can he play with Jaren? You posed that too.
But I think they're depending on him to play with Edey. And there's reason to believe that will work well offensively. To me, there's a question defensively on it.
Yeah, for sure. That 3-point percentage is key. Like, he's been 35% the last 2 seasons, and it's good enough as a big to be a threat out there. But
You feel like it should be better for him.
yeah, I mean, watch him practice. Like, he makes all these threes. It's a little bit of the Jake LaRavia, Jake obviously played well at the end of the season last year, but you would watch prior to that, like, you would watch Jake in practice, and he just makes every shot, and then he would get in the game and they weren't going in. It's a little bit of that, but I do find him to be, one of the more intriguing players just because I think he's going to be very important. And, while the Jaren stuff was still in the air a little bit, and again, they didn't say he's going to be ready for the start of the season, but this is not something that's serious, which is good. It's still, it puts an emphasis on, if something were to happen to one of the bigs, any of the bigs, honestly, then all of a sudden, Santi Aldama is pretty dang important to the team. So I was glad you read about that.
It also goes the other way with him. Like, there's a chance for him to have a real make a real step forward this season, both as a player and as a part of the Grizzlies. There's also a chance he gets squeezed. Like if he's not holding up well defensively, because one of the things Taylor Jenkins said, and I referenced in the story, was he talked about playing Zach Edey and like Aldama together, but he also said, the idea of Zach enabled them to play smaller. And he talked about Jake LaRavia, he talked about Gigi Jackson, he talked about Vince Williams and Marcus Smart at like power forward. Like, there's a chance that, like, if LaRavia and then later in the season Gigi Jackson are both playing really well, and Santi is like struggling on defense, like they could push him on for that role. That could also happen if it doesn't go well for Santi.
No, definitely. I think you're right there. The other big topic of interest at camp has obviously been Edey, and this is sort of the gist of what I wrote, but you should go read it. But it's very obvious, and we've talked about this, that he's going to be very important to this team because he's a rookie stepping into a clear role, we think. I mean, seems pretty obvious, right? And he's going to step into the shoes of 2 players that did a very good job for the team in Steven Adams and Jonas Valanciunas in a role that kept their half-court offense afloat during the seasons where their offense was definitely considered to be good. And now you're playing a guy that has 0 NBA minutes, that played in an entirely different system in college, and you're inserting him into a rotation where he's going to come in immediately with a lot of expectations. But you know what? The Grizzlies have not been willing to go that far and say that, which I find interesting.
It has been my assumption from the moment he was drafted that he'll be the starting center on opening night. But no one from the team has said that publicly or to me privately. But I still don't see any way that doesn't happen. I just would be very surprised if he's not in the starting lineup on opening night.
I would be shocked. And again, like, there is pressure on Zach Edey, whether they're going to say it or not. There's pressure on Zach Edey to perform well. And for this team to get off to a strong start, I think he needs to perform well, almost right out of the gate. I mean, the way that they can survive that is John, Des, and Jaren are all playing, and they're all great. But and they'll be okay. But that's not going to happen every single night. So you need something from Zach Edey. And so I think that, whether they want to acknowledge it or not, there is clear pressure on Zach Edey, but they're saying no pressure.
I feel like with the way the team's set up, if he's healthy, he's got to start. Now, how much you play is a separate thing, right? So if he's struggling a little bit, he could be a 20-minute starter, or if you're playing really well, he could be a 32-minute starter. I mean, there is difference there. You could finish games or not finish games. But I just don't see a situation because Brandon Clark doesn't want to start. And the Santi Jaren thing, I think, is just too not strong enough on the boards for what they need. The way this team is constructed, I just don't see a way that a healthy Zach Edey is not your starting center.
Marcus Smart was asked his first impression of Zach Edey, and he said, "That mother blank big." That's what he said. And he kind of whispered it as if it was some sort of secret. And no, that's not a secret. They've kept everything else secret, but that is not a secret. It's been fun to hear the guys talk about Zach Edey and what he's looked like in practice, and it keeps being brought up that he moves better than maybe some people expected. The 3-point thing, which I know is one of the questions on rapid fire later, so we don't have to go deep into it. It's interesting. I'm curious to see if that's a real thing or not. I don't know if I'm buying that. And then, yeah.
Well, the other part of him in terms of perimeter offense, and this wouldn't just be perimeter, but partly perimeter offense I'm interested in, and this is something we can't see with him by himself in a workout situation, is the passing angle. The passing stuff. Desmond Bain talked about that, about him, that him having some passing ability. He didn't really show that at Purdue. He didn't really have the opportunity to do that too much, He was so dominant on the low block. But the Grizzlies, with Steven Adams gone, a small thing I worry about with the Grizzlies is the passing ability collectively of its front court. Jaren, I think, made some good strides in that area last season, but it's certainly not a strength. I don't think about that as a particular strength of Brandon Clark's game. I do think Santi's more of a nifty passer than a consistent, playmaker. I think they need for their offense to really flow. I think Edey needs to be able to make reads and make plays, and move the ball effectively. And I'll be interested to see that.
The one piece that didn't make it into the story was I asked Marcus Smart if it was when he defends Zach Edey, if that's a mismatch, because everybody's talking about how big Edey is, and Brandon Clark said defending Edey in the paint is like trying to guard a giant. You just force him into his offhand and just hope he misses. And Marcus said that's a mismatch for him. That's not a mismatch for me.
Right.
I don't know about that one, Marcus, but
yeah. I will say that's more than just like a good line in a presser, because Marcus Smart has indeed guarded Joel Embiid in high leverage situations.
Yes, that's true.
And that's as close as you're going to get to Edey in terms of size and post acumen. I mean, there's no bigger, harder guard in the paint in the league than Joel Embiid, and Marcus Smart has taken on that assignment.
Yeah, no, that is true. That is true. So yeah, Edey's been the other theme. And then I think the smaller kind of different, but a little, it's been brought up a little bit, is where Ja's going to play. And there's been talk about in this new offense, Ja playing off the ball more as a cutter. And Marcus Smart talked about how, they can use sort of his athleticism and the pressure he can put on the rim as an effective tool to score. I go back to what I wrote this summer, though, and it was more like this team has been at its best when Ja's as ball dominant as possible. And I think that I don't know if that's a great idea to go away from that. I want the ball in Ja's hands on offense as much as they can possibly put the ball in his hands. And so to me, that was interesting too. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a subject I'm going to get into a little bit when I'm writing either today or tomorrow. It's an interesting question. Ja has been one of the highest usage guards in the league over the last 3 seasons. And it does sound like the way they're tweaking the offense is going to necessitate a slightly different look of that. I think one of the conceits I'm going to get into is that the idea of John Morant and Desmond Bain developing their game sort of towards each other a little bit. And we saw that with Dez last year. Dez's growth as a playmaker, Dez's growth as a finisher at the rim. I think, if I think we've known from day one, Ja's growth as a shooter is important to the team in any system. Ja being a better 3-point shooter. I think this sort of emphasizes that a little bit more. It's a small thing, but Ja's ability to be a finisher off the ball, I think more so in transition, but sometimes in the half court off of set plays as a lob threat. That is something that differentiates him from the other high usage guards. Your Luka Doncic, your Trae Young, your Jalen Brunson. Those are the other guys who are the very tippy top usage point guards. Those guys are not play finishers in the same way that Ja can be a play finisher. So that is a wrinkle that he provides that those other guys don't.
Yes. The everybody eats philosophy is great, and you can win using the everybody eats philosophy. I think of Denver, but you don't have to play that way to win. Like we saw it in the playoffs last year with Dallas too. Like you don't have to play that way to win. So,
well, I mean
that's interesting.
I think we talked about this on the last pod, and I'm not trying to be like the dinosaur who's against change, but I just will note the Grizzlies 3 years ago or whatever, where they won 56 games, they had the youngest team in the playoffs that year. They were a top 5 offense, and they made it to game 6 of the second round of the playoffs against the team that won the title. I know the half-court offense could have been a little bit better, but that was a pretty good place to be. And that was a team that was basically running John Morant, Steven Adams pick and roll and very more conventional offense. There are different ways to get from point A to point B. And if you could get back to what you were, that'd be a pretty good place to be.
Okay, we only have a few minutes remaining. We're going to go rapid fire with questions from Twitter here. First one, we've heard a lot about the intricacies of learning the new offense. If there are real changes, does this make it more difficult to add players via the trade or buyout in season?
That's an interesting question. This idea that if the Grizzlies are truly playing in a way that's radically different from other teams in the league, is it going to be harder for new players who come aboard mid-season to get acclimated? That's an interesting question. Does it impact the kind of player the Grizzlies seek out? I doubt that. But I also think it's sort of a little bit of a rush to judgment. Let's wait and see if this holds and how different it really is. But ultimately, I think NBA players are adaptable. And so I don't think it's that big.
Yeah. Okay, next. ESA, Patrick St. Andrews, was mentioned as the lead defensive coach. Does he have any experience running a defense with Memphis or Milwaukee? I'll take this one. I can say he was not touted as a defensive guy when he, came to Memphis. He was kind of he was known for his offensive prowess. Obviously, those keys have very clearly been turned over to Asalo and to some degree LaRoche, who they said is working on the kind of the pace of things. I would guess he's familiar with it though, because he has experience with Taylor Jenkins. I'm not overly concerned about that. Defense was the focus of the second practice. Offense was the focus of the first. So I can't answer that for certain, but I know he is familiar with it at the very least.
I guess what I would say about that, and Taylor Jenkins did, I don't know if he used the term coordinator, but did basically say that he was sort of running the defense or leading the defense or whatever. The Grizzlies had consistently had excellent defense through the entirety of Taylor Jenkins' tenure as head coach. Amid assistant coaching staff change, Taylor Jenkins' teams have been good on defense. And he has said they're not really changing in any significant way the way they approach defense. And so, whatever assistant coach is in charge of the defense, I'm much less concerned in that regard. They're basically doing the same kind of stuff they've done, and they've been successful at.
What's your biggest concern going into the season?
I don't know if I have a pat answer for that. The obvious thing is health, but obvious answer is health. But I know the Grizzlies had truly historic injury issues last season, but injuries are an issue all over the league. I think a lot of you look around, a lot of contenders, not all, Oklahoma City's pretty deep, but a lot of contenders are pretty shallow. Denver's way more shallow than Memphis. Michael Porter Jr. played 81 games last year. Is that going to happen again? New York has made themselves very shallow. They got basically 6 guys they can depend on, and OG Anunoby misses half a season every year. I think the injury question applies to most teams that have high hopes, and some of those teams are going to be hit more by injuries than others, and that'll help sort stuff out. I think the Grizzlies are more susceptible than some, like OKC. But I think there are plenty of other teams that are probably as susceptible to that issue as the Grizzlies are.
I'll let that answer stand for time purposes. With Gigi Jackson and Vince Williams sidelined to start the season, who are some guys that could step up and get those rotation minutes? I think a clear one here is Jake LaRavia, who's going to hopefully be able to take advantage of this. And I asked him about this at Media Day, and I framed the question not the way I wanted to, I think, in the moment, because I thought it was going to be a competition regardless, actually, in camp for Jake to get minutes. Like, he would have had an opportunity to earn minutes for sure. That would have been competitive regardless if Gigi and Vince were injured. But Jake LaRavia is the clear answer here. Santi, he's probably going to get a little bit more run, I would guess, if they don't have the optionality of those small ball lineups. So I would go with those two guys. Predict the total number of threes made by Zach Edey this season. Let's frame it this way. Do you think Zach Edey makes more than 5 threes this season?
I do. I was going to set the number higher than that.
Like,
Sure, whether my number would be perceived as optimistic or pessimistic. I was toying with somewhere between the 12 to 15 range on this, which is not a lot. By the way, Jonas Valanciunas hit like 40 last season, I think I think they're going to encourage him to shoot enough when he's wide open. I think he will be wide open enough that if he plays 60 games, maybe he makes a three like every 4th or 5th game, something like that. That's sort of what I'm thinking.
I would take the over on 5. I thought you might go under there, so that's why I put it there. Yeah, I'll go 8 to 12. 8 to 12 is
right.
I think at some point he's going to get the opportunity to be shooting threes, and it'll probably be early in the season. The question is, do they stick with that? And that'll probably have an impact, and we'll figure out then. It wouldn't be Grizzlies talk without a trade question. Most likely to be traded at the deadline, Chris.
If this will be a better question to field on October 22nd. If Santi Aldama does not have an extension by the extension deadline, I think he is the answer to that question. He'll be in the same situation, sort of, that's not entirely, but sort of the same situation as Tillman was last year. And so I think that would move him it wouldn't guarantee he's going to get dealt, but it would move him to the front of the likely list if he goes into the season without an extension. And then the other players, I think there's sort of a class of players because I think there are like 6 guys who just aren't getting traded. And then there's some other guys who just aren't really going to have value, and then you have this class in the middle that's Santi, Marcus Smart, Luke Kennard, LaRavia, maybe Conchar. It'd be that group of players to me. But I think if without an extension, Santi would be the answer.
Let's see if we can squeeze in 3 more. People are asking where they can watch the games. I know there's Bally News. I think you'll be able to watch the games. I can't say much more than that. You'll be able to watch the games, as to where it is or what it is.
It's probably effectively not going to be much different than it was last season.
Yes.
Right? That would be a guess.
What's more likely? Ja to be top 5 in the MVP, Dez to be an all-star, Jaren to be the defensive player of the year, or Edey to be the unanimous rookie of the year? I would say unanimous is so hard.
Unanimous finalist. We'll do it quick. So what's your answer?
I would say Dez to be an all-star.
It's easy for me to say the least likely. I think the least likely is most improved because I don't think they have someone who's lined up for that. I'm real torn on the other 4. I could argue either of the 4. Actually, I think I am going to go with the Edey unanimous just because I think the other 3 are pretty hard. And I think if he is a quality starter on a good team, there's a chance he will be the only rookie this season who is a quality starter on a good team. So I can see that happen.
If the injuries are kept to a minimum, what do you think do you think the front office will be aggressive at the trade deadline if this team is competitive? I think it's hard with the cap, with the luxury tax. If they're not willing to go over that, then, right, and they haven't said that they 100% are, then I would probably say no to that.
I think that's a good answer. I think they need to get to a point where they truly, not just they say it in a press conference, but they truly believe they're like a move away from like competing for a title. and B, that move is there for them to make. I get the sense, the fact that they dodged the tax to this point tells me they're going to dodge the tax unless those two things are both in play.
All right, that's going to do it for us this week. As always, Chris and I will be back to discuss the start of the preseason for the Grizzlies. Thank you for listening. Listen to all the other Daily Memphian podcasts. For Drew and for Chris, we're out of here.